Hello all, this is Dr. Fox, and we're going to begin our discussion of the lymphatic system with an introduction to the lymphatic system. In this video, we'll describe the structure and functions of the lymphatic system. We'll distinguish between innate and acquired immunity. We will also distinguish between primary and secondary lymphatic organs and tissues, and describe the functional pathways of both cellular and humoral-mediated immune responses. We'll also describe the gross pattern of lymphatic drainage and the process of edema. So let's begin with the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system can be conceptualized as its own system or sometimes as part of the cardiovascular system, but it does have roles that go beyond the cardiovascular system, and so we'll treat it as its own individual system. It consists of the following portions: lymph, which is a liquid connective tissue; lymph vessels, which transports the lymph; lymphatic organs; and red bone marrow. In terms of the functional and the structural portions of the lymphatic system, the structural portion of the lymphatic system, or the stroma, is reticular connective tissue, whereas the functional portion of the system, or the parenchyma, are the lymphocytes. The three major functions of the lymphatic system includes fluid balance. So it is what picks up any excess interstitial fluid to return it back to venous circulation within the thorax. It's also responsible for the absorption of various fats and the transportation of lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins, such as vitamins A, D, E, and K. And finally, and probably most famously, the lymphatic system is important for modulating immune responses. So immunity comes in two basic categories. There is innate immunity. Innate immunity is nonspecific, so it doesn't require any previous exposure to any pathogen, or more specifically, an antigen. It's very broad and can handle different pathogens, such as fungi and bacteria and protozoans and viruses, etc. And as it is nonspecific, there are a couple of generalized approaches that innate immunity can take. Two of the more basic would be fever, or an elevated body temperature, and inflammation. We could contrast this with acquired immunity. Acquired immunity requires exposure to specific antigens, and the immune response is specific to those antigens. Acquired immunity is carried out under the purview of lymphocytes, so T cells and B cells cell derivatives such as plasma cells, and either memory T cells or memory B cells. Here we can see a rather interesting example of a scanning electron micrograph of HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, emerging from a lymphocyte. The HIV here is in green. In terms of lymphatic organs and tissues, we have two general categories. There are the primary lymphatic organs and the secondary lymphatic organs and tissues. So primary lymphatic organs have two things in common. One, they are locations of stem cell mitosis. So we have those lymphoid stem cells dividing, and they are places of immunocompetence, meaning the lymphocytes are gaining the ability to mount an immune response. And so these include two things: red bone marrow, which can be found in the epiphyses and metaphyses of long bones, as well as the spongy center of various flat bones. So this is hematopoietic connective tissue, as well as the thymus, or thymus gland, which is found in the anterior as well as superior mediastinum of the thoracic cavity. Secondary lymphatic organs, as well as tissues, are places where immune responses are modulated. And these include lymph nodes and lymph nodules. Lymph nodes are encapsulated. Lymph nodules are acapsular, as well as the spleen. So lymph nodes and nodules are dispersed throughout the body. Lymph nodules are more common surrounding the pharynx. And the spleen is found in the left upper quadrant of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Now let's talk about the parenchyma, or the active portion of the lymphatic system. And these are going to include lymphocytes. So we will start with T lymphocytes. We usually call these T cells for short. T because they are derived from the thymus. T cells are the basis for cellular immunity. And so we'll get to the other half of acquired immunity, which is humoral immunity, which is the result of B cells. T cells come in a couple of different varieties. There are cytotoxic T cells, also known as CD8 cells, because they have CD8 receptors on their surface. Cytotoxic T cells are ones that can directly kill pathogens based on their exposure to particular antigens from those pathogens. There are also T helper cells. T helper cells are involved in the pathway of helping cytotoxic T cells become activated. So over here, we can see an antigen-presenting cell. So this can be a wandering macrophage or a dendritic cell. And what they do is they present the antigen to the helper T cell. And the helper T cell can present an antigen to the cytotoxic T cell to activate it or create it. So these helper T cells are often called CD4 cells because of the receptors CD4 on their surface. So cytotoxic T cells and T helper cells are two examples of T cells. Activated cytotoxic T cells can then persist as T memory cells, which then when they encounter the antigen of a pathogen again, can become quickly activated and deal with any particular infection that is specific to that antigen. We also have T regulatory cells, Tregs for short, formerly known as T suppressor cells, and these are important cells in recognizing autoimmunity and keeping the immune system from going after self as opposed to non-self, which would be pathogens. The other side of acquired immunity are B lymphocytes, B cells for short. So this is humoral immunity. And humoral immunity is meted out via antibodies. So we discussed things in the blood such as IgG, IgM, IgE. These are all examples of immunoglobulins or antibodies. Antibodies have kind of a Y shape, and they have variable regions at the ends of the Y, which are particular to different antigens. And when they encounter that, when the antibody and the antigen come together, they form a complex, and that's when the full weight of the immune system comes in to destroy whatever is in that area. Now, B cells or B lymphocytes circulate within the blood as they become co-stimulated by helper T cells. They activate into plasma cells and move into tissues. That's when they begin shedding antibodies and dealing with infections. Those that persist are known as memory B cells, and much like memory T cells, can quickly respond to any particular pathogen or antigen against which they have been activated. So note that these helper T cells are an important part of both cellular and humoral mediated immunity. And if anything were to take them out, such as an HIV infection, that can really hobble an individual's ability to mount an acquired immune response. So lymph circulation has a very sort of generalized pathway, and we'll get into the specifics of many individual regional lymphatic circulation. But what it does is there are specialized capillaries called lymphatic capillaries. These lymphatic capillaries have valves, which are one way, and they pick up interstitial fluid. They're highly permeable, and because they have one-way valves, they promote unidirectional flow. Lymph does not flow out of lymphatic capillaries except into lymphatic vessels. There are specialized lymphatic capillaries in the small intestine, which are known as lacteals, that pick up chyle, which is lipid-rich substances, to help absorb that from the lining of the GI tract of the small intestine. Lymphatic capillaries feed into lymphatic vessels. All along lymphatic vessels, they will be filtered through lymph nodes, which are condensations of capsulated reticular connective tissue. Along more superficial routes, so just deep to the skin, these lymphatic vessels and clusters of lymph nodes follow venous circulation, whereas deeper within the body, so along various viscera, these lymphatic vessels will follow arteries. Lymphatic vessels and their nodes are going to coalesce into lymphatic trunks, and lymphatic trunks will coalesce into ducts. There are two major lymphatic ducts. There is the right lymphatic duct, which drains into the right venous angle. This is draining all of the lymph of the right upper limb and the right thorax and the right side of the head and neck. And then there is also the thoracic duct. The thoracic duct drains into the left venous angle and is going to drain all of the lymph from the lower limbs and the abdominal pelvic cavity, so everything below the diaphragm, as well as the left thorax, the left upper limb, and the left side of the head and neck. But we'll get into the particulars of that in subsequent videos. So ultimately, all of the excess interstitial fluid ends up being drained into venous angles of the thorax, so it's returned to venous circulation. Edema. Edema is a fancy way of saying swelling. And edema is frequently something that occurs whenever filtration exceeds reabsorption. So there are many underlying etiologies, various ways in which edema may come about. Congestive heart failure is by far the most common, but nephrotic syndrome or an overabundance of protein in the nephrons of the kidneys are another. So you can arrive at edema many different ways. One specific to the lymphatic system is lymphedema, and that is when there is some sort of either malformation or injury that precludes the flow of lymph such that lymph can be returned back into venous return. Here's an example of pitting edema. Pitting edema is something that often is the result of congestive heart failure, and it's when if you press into a portion that is edematous, that portion remains as a pit. That is contrasted with non-pitting edema, where the pressure is so great that it does not leave a pit. Neither is worse than the other. They just are indicative of likely different underlying etiologies. So let's test some of the knowledge that we've discussed here. Antibodies or immunoglobulins are involved in what type of immune response? Is it cell-mediated? No, that would be T cells. Humoral immunity, yes, that would be correct. Or innate immunity, nope, they are part of the acquired immune system. So B, humoral immunity, is the correct response. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.